The moment you realize that the person you trusted most has been systematically destroying your life for 20 years, feels like your heart stops beating while your body keeps moving. My name is Ingrid Mueller, and I'm now 65 years old and live in a beautiful house overlooking the Rhine Valley. But in 2003, I was just a 44-year-old woman who thought she knew everything about her husband Klaus, her business partner, and her so-called best friend. What I'm about to tell you is not just a story of betrayals. It's the story of how a middle-aged German woman turned the tables so completely that her enemies were still paying the price 2 decades later. Before I tell you this story today, I'd be incredibly grateful if you could take a moment to subscribe to my channel. It would mean the world to me. And please tell me in the comments what city in Germany you're watching from, or if you're maybe somewhere else entirely. I love connecting with people around the world, and your support gives these old hands the strength to keep sharing these stories. Let me take you back to Stuttgart in 2003. Picture this. I'm standing in my immaculate kitchen. The hand-painted Bavarian tiles Klaus and I had imported from Munich, catching the late September light as I prepare Sauerbraten for Sunday dinner, as I had done every week for the 18 years of our marriage. The afternoon sun slipped through the lace curtains my mother had sewn and cast soft shadows across the mahogany table, set for 12. Perfect for entertaining Klaus's business partners, with whom we had built the construction firm from nothing. Klaus Wilhelm Müller looked, to the outside world, like everything a German woman of my generation could want in a husband. Big, broad-shouldered, with that distinctive Swabian accent that made him sound both authoritative and charming. He had thick salt and pepper hair he kept immaculately groomed, and he wore his success like a tailored suit. In 1987, we founded Müller-Bau, with a loan from my father and Klaus's relentless ambition. I handled the bookkeeping, permits, client relations, essentially everything that required organization and precision, which, as any German woman will tell you, is our strength. Klaus handled the sites, the heavy machines, and the toasts with municipal officials over Lovenbräu steins. Our business had grown from a small renovation outfit into one of Stuttgart's most respected construction companies. We employed 47 people, had municipal contracts, and were working on a massive shopping center that would cement our reputation. I was proud of what we had built together. Every morning I arrived at our Königstrasse office at 7:30 on the dot. The coffee was already made, the files sorted, and I was ready to spend another day turning Klaus's big visions into profitable reality. But on that September Sunday, something felt different. Klaus had been on more and more business trips lately, to Frankfurt, Munich, sometimes even Berlin. Those trips had grown longer and more frequent over the past year. When I asked, he waved it off with something about new opportunities or expanding territories. I trusted him completely. After all, this was the man who had held my hand when my mother had cancer, who surprised me with a trip to Venice for our 15th anniversary, who brought me yellow roses every Friday because he knew they were my favorite. The call came at 2:47 p.m. I remember the time, exactly because I glanced at the kitchen clock and calculated how long the roast needed before Klaus's brother Hermann and his family arrived. The woman on the other end had a soft, almost hesitant voice with a Kölsch accent, very different from our Stuttgart dialect. "Mrs. Müller," she said, "you don't know me, but I know you. My name is Petra Hoffmann. I have to tell you something about your husband." I almost hung up. Germans are practical people, and strange calls from unknown women usually mean trouble of the worst kind. But something in her voice, maybe a tremor of guilt or fear, made me stay on the line. "What about Klaus?" I asked, my hand tightening around the receiver. "He's been living with me in Cologne for 3 years. We have an apartment on Ehrenstrasse. He told me he was divorced, that you'd taken everything in the settlement and he was starting over. But then I saw the newspaper article about your new company contract, and there was a photo of you two at the celebration. You were wearing a wedding ring and—" The wooden spoon in my other hand fell to the floor. The sound echoed through the kitchen like a gunshot. "That's impossible," I whispered. Klaus is home every night. We just celebrated our 18th wedding anniversary in August. We spent it in the Black Forest, stayed at that little inn in Freudenstadt. Mrs. Muller, Petra continued, her voice firmer now, determined. I have proof. Credit card statements, photos of us. He pays half the rent. He keeps clothes there, personal things. He tells people in Cologne he's single and successful, that he built his construction empire alone after a bitter divorce. I slid into one of the kitchen chairs, the same ones Klaus and I had picked out together at the Sindelfingen furniture market. My head spun, trying to make sense of what this woman was telling me. Klaus's overnight trips, the new perfume I'd noticed recently, the way he'd started keeping his phone with him at all times, taking calls in another room. Why are you telling me this? I asked at last, a long pause. Then, because I found out I'm pregnant. And when I told Klaus, he said he needed time to think. But Mrs. Muller, if he's still married to you, if he's lied to me about everything, I need to know what kind of man I'm dealing with. Her words hit me like a blow. Pregnant. This woman, this stranger in Cologne, was carrying my husband's child while I was at home preparing his Sunday dinner, ironing his shirts, running his business, living, I realized now, inside a complete lie. After I hung up, I sat in that kitchen for 2 hours and watched the sauerbraten slowly burn in the oven. When Hermann and his family arrived, I said Klaus had been called away on urgent business and we'd have to postpone. I threw the ruined roast away, along with the elaborately set table I'd spent the morning preparing. That night I did something I had never done in 18 years of marriage. I searched through Klaus's personal things. What I found in his office, tucked behind a filing cabinet in a folder labeled Business Expenses, Frankfurt, changed everything. Credit card statements with restaurant, hotel, and lingerie charges in Cologne, all on days he had told me he was on sites in Frankfurt. Receipts for jewelry I had never seen, flowers I'd never received, romantic weekends I'd never shared. But the worst discovery was a letter in Klaus's neat handwriting addressed to someone. He called my dearest darling. In it he wrote about his difficult situation with his business partner and ex-wife, who made divorce messy. He described me as bitter and vindictive, someone who out of spite would steal the company we built together. He promised Petra that they could be together once he'd cleared Ingrid's legal obstacles, maybe even moved to Austria, where he'd already been looking at plots of land. I stayed up all night reading that letter over and over, memorizing every cruel phrase, every offhand diminution of our life together. By morning, I had made a decision that would change everything. Instead of confronting Klaus directly, instead of shouting or crying or hurling plates a la some American TV drama, I did what any smart German businesswoman would do. I began to collect evidence, real evidence, evidence that would hold up in court and, even more importantly, in the court of public opinion in a city like Stuttgart, where reputation is everything. I hired a private detective, a former detective named Werner Brandt, who specialized in adultery cases. Mr. Brandt was methodical, the sort of man whose attention to detail I appreciated. Within 2 weeks, he had photographed Klaus entering and leaving the Cologne apartment, documented his weekend routine there, and even obtained copies of the lease Klaus had signed as a single man. But I did not stop. I started my own forensic audit of our company books, checking every account, every contract, every expense report with the precision of an indulgent accountant. What I discovered made Klaus's personal betrayal seem almost trivial. For 5 years, Klaus had been systematically embezzling money from our company, not huge sums that would be immediately conspicuous, but a steady drip into personal accounts. He inflated material costs on municipal contracts and skimmed the difference. He ran private expenditures on the corporate credit card and flagged them as business dinners or equipment purchases. Most cleverly, he created fake invoices and funneled money through shell companies he controlled. All told, Klaus had siphoned off nearly $200,000 from our firm. Money that should have gone into equipment, wages, and growth. Money that represented my years of careful financial planning and strategic thinking. But here, he had miscalculated. In Germany, I was not just his wife. I was an equal partner in the firm, with full access to the accounts and legal authority to make financial decisions. And unlike Klaus, I had documented everything from the start. For 3 weeks, I prepared my counter-strike. I consulted lawyers, accountants, and business advisors. I studied every legal option available to me. I analyzed Klaus's patterns, his relationships with clients and officials, his weaknesses. Then I began to execute a plan so thorough and devastating that even now, 20 years later, I sometimes wonder if I went too far. The first phase of my revenge was financial. On a Tuesday morning in October, while Klaus was in Frankfurt, actually in Cologne as I now knew, I went to our business bank and, in my legal capacity as co-owner, had all corporate accounts frozen pending an internal audit. I then filed a formal report with the Economic Crimes Division of the Stuttgart Police and handed over every piece of evidence Mr. Brandt and I had collected. That same day, I visited every major client with whom we had active contracts. I did not present myself as the wronged wife. I presented myself as a concerned business partner who had discovered severe irregularities. I assured them I was taking steps to protect their interests and that any delays would be temporary. Most important was my visit to the city planning office, where I requested a meeting with Mr. Dietrich, the official who had been Klaus's main contact for municipal contracts. Mr. Dietrich was a serious man in his 60s who took municipal integrity very seriously. When I showed him evidence that Klaus had inflated costs on city projects, his face went as red as an overripe tomato. "Mrs. Muller," he said, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses, "these are very serious allegations. If true, this is not only theft from your company, but fraud against the city of Stuttgart." "I understand completely, Mr. Dietrich," I replied calmly and professionally, the way I had learned in 20 years of business. "That is why I'm bringing it to you immediately. I believe in accountability and transparency, and I want to ensure the city's interests are protected." Within 48 hours, the city opened its own investigation and halted all payments to Müller-Bau pending clarification. Our biggest contract, the shopping center that was to be our crowning achievement, was put on indefinite hold. Klaus came back Thursday afternoon from his business trip and found his world in ruins. The accounts were frozen. The police were looking for him. Our largest clients demanded explanations, and I sat in the living room calm as a mountain lake with the divorce papers on the coffee table and a complete dossier about his double life beside them. "Ingrid," he said, his face as pale as winter snow, "what have you done?" "I protected our business and our reputation," I answered evenly. "Exactly what you should have done all along." He tried to bluff, to insist I was overreacting, that it must be a mistake. But when I opened the folder with Mr. Brandt's photos and placed copies of his own credit card statements in his hands, he slumped into the leather armchair like an empty balloon. "How long did you know?" he asked softly. "Long enough to make sure I had everything," I said. "Long enough to legally and financially secure myself. Long enough for everyone to know what kind of man Klaus Müller really is." The following months were a whirlwind of court proceedings, media attention, and social chaos. The Stuttgart papers picked up the story, and it became a sensation. Construction King's Double Life, exposed by wife. The local paper ran a 3-part series calling it A Lesson in Trust and Betrayal in Modern German Business. But this is where my revenge became truly masterful. Instead of simply divorcing him and moving on, I decided to rebuild the company without him, and to do it so successfully that his absence would demonstrate how little he had actually contributed to our success. Used the fact that I was the innocent party in the scandal to my advantage. Clients who had been hesitant to work with a company under investigation gradually realized that all the problems originated with Klaus alone. I was the one who had uncovered the fraud, alerted the authorities, and taken steps to set things right. I was the victim trying to save jobs and finish projects, while Klaus was the villain who had betrayed his wife, employees, and clients. I restructured the firm as Müller-Schmidt-Bau, reverted to my maiden name, and brought my cousin Heinrich Schmidt in as a partner. Heinrich was a civil engineer with 20 years' experience who had admired our company while working in Munich. He was thrilled to help rebuild something that had been tainted by Klaus's greed. The turnaround was remarkable. Without Klaus's expensive tastes, inflated expense reports, and extravagant spending, the company's margins improved dramatically. I reinvested every euro back into the business. Better equipment, higher wages, more competitive bids. I implemented transparent accounting practices and regular audits, and Müller-Schmidt-Bau became a model of business integrity in the Stuttgart market. Within 2 years, we had not only finished all the projects. Klaus had left unfinished, but also secured 3 major new contracts, including the renovation of the Stuttgart Opera, one of the most prestigious projects in recent city history. But I wasn't done with Klaus yet. Oh no, dear viewers! The financial and professional consequences were only the beginning. You see, Klaus had made a crucial miscalculation. He assumed his reputation and connections in the construction world would protect him, that he could simply move to another city, perhaps Berlin or Hamburg, and start over. According to Mr. Brandt's surveillance, he had even told Petra they would ride this storm out together and start a new life somewhere else. What Klaus didn't understand was how tightly knit the German construction industry is, especially in Baden-Württemberg. Project managers talk, city officials swap information, insurers keep meticulous records, news travels fast when someone's reputation for financial impropriety is on the line. I made sure the story traveled even faster. I began accepting invitations to industry conferences and association meetings, events I had previously avoided because Klaus preferred to do the networking himself. At these gatherings, I presented myself as a cautionary tale, an entrepreneur who had learned the hard way about internal controls and transparency. I gave talks about internal control systems, how to protect your business from embezzlement, and the warning signs owners should watch for. Those talks were very well received. People love a story about someone overcoming adversity, especially when that person is willing to share practical lessons to help others avoid the same fate. More importantly, those presentations ensured Klaus's name and deeds became known throughout the southern German construction community. I also cultivated excellent relationships with the journalists who had covered our story. When reporters needed expert commentary on building regulations, women in business, or corporate governance, they called me. That kept our story and Klaus's fall from grace in the public eye far longer than it otherwise would have been. Meanwhile, Klaus discovered that his options were much narrower than he had expected. The criminal charges meant he could not simply disappear. The civil suit I filed tied up his assets in legal proceedings, and his reputation meant no reputable construction firm would hire him, not even as a foreman, according to Mr. Brandt, who continued to monitor Klaus at my request. He and Petra had moved into a small flat in Mannheim, where Klaus worked in landscaping for a fraction of his former salary. The baby, a little boy born in spring 2004, was now part of their life, but Klaus struggled to pay child support while meeting the financial obligations from our divorce. But the most satisfying part of my revenge was yet to come. In 2005, almost 2 years after I first learned of Klaus's betrayal, I got a call from Mr. Dietrich at the city planning office. The city had decided to award a major infrastructure project, a new bridge over the Neckar, one of the most important construction undertakings in recent Stuttgart history. The contract was worth 12 million euros and would establish the winning firm as a leading regional builder. Mrs. Müller, Mr. Dietrich said, given your company's excellent performance on recent municipal projects and your reputation for integrity and transparency, I'd like to invite Müller-Schmidt-Bau to bid on this project. I was so stunned I had to sit down. This was the kind of contract Klaus had always dreamed of, the kind of project that cements a construction firm's reputation for generations. And it was being offered to me, the woman he had dismissed as a mere bookkeeper and business partner. For 3 months, I prepared our bid with the meticulous attention to detail that had always been my strength. I consulted structural engineers, environmental experts, and traffic flow specialists. I created detailed timelines, comprehensive safety protocols, and innovative solutions to minimize disruption to river traffic during construction. The proposal ran 347 pages and addressed every conceivable aspect of the project. When Müller-Schmidt-Bau won the contract in November 2005, it was front-page news in the Stuttgart papers. The headline in the Stuttgarter Nachrichten read, "Phoenix rises. Local businesswoman's firm wins major bridge contract." The article described how I had rebuilt the company after my husband's misconduct, how I had regained the city's trust, and how this award marked a new chapter not only for my firm, but for women in the construction industry across Baden-Württemberg. But the part that made this victory truly sweet was this. Klaus had also submitted a bid for the project. Through a shell company and using falsified references, Klaus had tried to win the very contract he believed should be his. Mr. Brandt uncovered this during his continued surveillance, and I promptly reported it to both the city and the police. Attempting fraud while he was already under investigation for embezzlement led to additional criminal charges and ensured Klaus would face significant prison time. The bridge project took 3 years to complete and became a showcase of everything Müller-Schmidt-Bau stood for. We finished ahead of schedule and under budget. We maintained exemplary safety standards throughout the build. We minimized environmental impact and worked closely with residents to address concerns about noise and traffic disruptions. Above all, the bridge became a symbol of renewal and resilience. Local newspapers wrote about it as an example of how Stuttgart modernizes its infrastructure while honoring history and values. Architecture magazines featured it in articles on innovative German engineering. Tourism websites recommended it as a viewpoint for visitors to take in the Neckar and the city skyline. Every time I drove across that bridge, which I often did, not infrequently taking small detours just for the pleasure, I thought of Klaus. I pictured him sitting in his small apartment in Mannheim, likely watching coverage of the construction progress and knowing that this grand structure represented everything he had lost through his greed and deceit. But my revenge was not yet complete. Oh no, my dear viewers, there was one last chapter to this story. If this path to justice speaks to you and you haven't subscribed yet, I'd be grateful if you took a moment to do so now. And please tell me in the comments, have you ever had to rebuild your life after someone's betrayal? I read every comment, and I love your stories of resilience and strength. In 2008, 5 years after Petra's call shattered my comfortable illusions, I made a decision some called generous and others called cruel. I decided to help Petra. You see, through Mr. Brandt's continued monitoring, I had learned Petra was struggling. Klaus's reduced income meant child support payments were irregular and inadequate. She worked 2 part-time jobs while caring for her 4-year-old son, whom Klaus saw only sporadically due to his work schedule and his ongoing legal troubles. She had moved 3 times in 4 years, each time into a smaller, cheaper apartment. But this is where Petra differed from Klaus. She had never known about me. She had been honestly deceived just as I had. When she learned the truth about Klaus's marriage, she did the right thing and called me. She was brave enough to upend her own life to tell a stranger and uncomfortable truth, knowing it would destroy her own relationship. I respected that kind of moral courage. So I called Petra. After 5 years of silence between us, I picked up the phone and invited her for coffee in Heidelberg, a neutral spot between Stuttgart and Mannheim. She was smaller than I expected, with short blonde hair and tired eyes that reminded me of my own reflection in the darkest days after Klaus's betrayal. She wore a simple gray dress and inexpensive shoes, clutching her handbag like a life preserver as she sat across from me in a little cafe overlooking the main street. "Mrs. Müller," she said quietly, "I don't know why you wanted to see me, but I want you to know I'm sorry. I'm sorry for everything that happened, for my part in hurting you, for believing Klaus's lies about the divorce. Petra, I replied, you were as much a victim in this as I was. Klaus lied to both of us. The difference is that when you learned the truth, you did the honorable thing. We talked for 3 hours that afternoon. Petra told me about her struggles as a single mother, about her son Lucas, bright and curious, but in need of stability she could barely provide. She told me about her dream of becoming a teacher, a dream she had shelved when she got pregnant, and how she sometimes doubted she could ever finish her education. I told her about rebuilding the company, about the satisfaction of proving Klaus wrong, about the bridge project and how it had become a symbol of something larger than mere construction. I also told her about the loneliness success can't cure, that professional proof of one's competence doesn't always bind up the personal wounds of betrayal. At the end of our conversation, I made Petra an offer that surprised us both. I would help her return to school to become a teacher, and I would give her stable employment while she completed her studies. Why would you do that for me? She asked, tears in her eyes. Because Klaus hurt us both, I answered. But that doesn't mean we have to keep hurting each other. And because your son deserves better than Klaus can give him. I hired Petra as an administrative assistant at Miller-Schmidt-Bau, a position with flexible hours so she could take classes at Heidelberg University. She proved sharp, organized, and diligent qualities Klaus had apparently taken for granted when he dismissed her as just another woman he could manipulate. Over the next 4 years, Petra completed her teaching degree while working at my company. Her son Lucas would sometimes come to the office after school, doing his homework in the break room while his mother finished up. He was a delightful child, curious about everything, especially the construction projects we worked on. He peppered us with endless questions about bridges and buildings, how concrete is mixed, and why steel beams are shaped the way they are. Watching Lucas grow and thrive, seeing Petra transform from a struggling single mother into a confident, educated professional, brought me a satisfaction different from, but just as great as, the pleasure of Klaus's downfall. This was constructive rather than destructive, creative rather than vengeful. It was, I realized, the completion of my revenge, not just tearing down what Klaus had built through deceit, but erecting something better in its place. In 2012, Petra graduated with honors and immediately found a job as a math teacher at a Heidelberg gymnasium. At her commencement, I sat in the audience next to 8-year-old Lucas, who clapped with delight when his mother's name was called. Afterwards, at the small celebratory dinner we shared, Petra raised her glass of Riesling and offered a toast I will never forget. To Ingrid, she said, who showed me that the best revenge against someone who tried to destroy you is to build something beautiful. But Klaus's story wasn't over yet, and neither was mine. In 2013, 10 years after his crimes came to light, Klaus was finally released from prison. He had served 3 years for embezzlement and fraud, followed by 2 more for the additional charges related to his attempt to obtain the bridge contract under false pretenses. He was now 58, effectively unemployable in the construction industry, facing a world that had moved on without him. According to Mr. Brandt, who kept an eye on Klaus out of professional thoroughness, Klaus tried after his release to re-establish contact with Petra and Lucas. But Petra, now a confident, financially independent professional with a beloved career, had no interest in resuming a relationship built on lies. Lucas, 13 by then, and having seen little of his father during the formative years of his childhood, was polite but distant at their awkward meetings. Klaus had moved to a small town near Karlsruhe, where he worked as a handyman and rented a room above a bakery. The man who once employed 47 people and managed multi-million euro projects now fixed leaky faucets and painted garden sheds for 70 euros a day. I could have felt pity. Perhaps a more forgiving person would have, but every time I leaned towards sympathy, I remembered that letter where he called me bitter and vindictive, where he dismissed our 18-year marriage and shared business success as obstacles to be overcome, rather than achievements to be valued. Besides, I had more important things to concern myself with than Klaus's misfortunes. Müller Schmidt Bau had become one of the most respected companies in southwestern Germany. We employed 68 people and had projects from Stuttgart to Mannheim to Heidelberg. The Neckar Bridge had led to further major contracts, including the restoration of several historic buildings in Stuttgart's Old Town and the construction of a new wing for the Stuttgart Hospital. More important still, I used my success to support other women facing similar challenges. I established a scholarship fund for women returning to school after divorce or widowhood. I mentored young female entrepreneurs. I spoke at conferences on financial literacy and business leadership, sharing not only the technical knowledge I had acquired, but also the hard-earned wisdom about resilience and self-reliance. In 2015, I was on the cover of Unternehmerin magazine as Businesswoman of the Year, and the accompanying article called me a role model for German women who refuse to be defined by others' expectations or limitations. The photo showed me standing before the Neckar Bridge, wearing a hard hat and safety vest, the Stuttgart skyline rising behind me. Seeing that cover, I thought of the woman I had been in 2003, the woman who defined herself primarily as Klaus's wife and business partner, who was content to work in the background while he received public accolades, who believed her role was to support rather than to lead. That woman felt like a stranger now, someone I had known long ago but hardly recognized anymore. The final chapter of my revenge came in 2018, 15 years after Petra's call changed everything. I received an unexpected visitor at my office, Klaus himself. He looked older than his 63 years, gray hair noticeably thinned, lines around his eyes telling of hard years and disappointed hopes. He wore a cheap suit that didn't fit quite right and moved with the defeated bearing of a man who has learned the world can be relentlessly unforgiving. "Ingrid," he said as my secretary showed him in, "I know I have no right to ask you for anything, but I need work. I need a chance to rebuild my life." I studied him for a long moment, this man who had once been the center of my world, who had shaped so many of my decisions and dreams. He seemed small there in the chair across from my mahogany desk, small and ordinary and somehow pitiable. "Klaus," I said at last, "you had the chance to rebuild your life 15 years ago. Instead, you chose to keep lying, to keep cutting corners, to keep deceiving people. You even tried to steal the bridge contract from me after everything." "I was desperate," he said. "I wasn't thinking clearly. Prison changes a man, Ingrid. I had time to think about what I'd done, about the mistakes I made. I want to make amends." "Make amends?" I laughed without humor. "Klaus, you can't make up for 20 years of lies. You can't just apologize for stealing from our employees' pension fund. You can't undo the damage you did to our reputation, our client relationships, my ability to trust another human being." He was quiet for a moment, then, "What can I do, Ingrid? I'm 58 years old. No one will hire me for anything meaningful. I live in a rented room and do odd jobs for pocket change. I just want the chance to earn an honest living." I looked at this man who had once seemed so powerful, so self-assured, so certain of his place in the world. I thought of the years I had spent planning my revenge, executing it and savoring its fruits. I thought of the realm I had built from the ashes of his betrayal, of the women I had helped, of the bridges, literal and figurative, I had raised. "Klaus," I said, "I made this company into something better than it ever was when we were partners. I did that not just in spite of your betrayal, but because of it. Your crimes taught me I was stronger than I ever thought, more capable than I ever believed. In a strange way, I ought to thank you." He looked up hopefully, as if my words might lead to the job offer he so desperately needed. "But I won't thank you," I continued, "because your betrayal also taught me that some actions have consequences that last a lifetime. You chose to lie, to steal, to deceive everyone who trusted you. You chose to label me in that letter as bitter and vindictive, to dismiss our marriage as an obstacle to your happiness. Those were your choices, Klaus. These are the consequences." I rose from my desk and went to the window overlooking the construction site where we were building a new office complex for a tech company. I won't give you a job, Klaus, because I don't trust you. And more importantly, because I don't have to. I've moved beyond revenge to something far more satisfying, success that has nothing whatsoever to do with you. Klaus left my office that day with the same defeated posture he had brought in, and I never saw him again. A few months later, Mr. Brandt informed me that Klaus had moved to Berlin, where he was reportedly working at a home improvement store and living with a much older woman who supported him financially. It was, Mr. Brandt noted with typically German understatement, a rather reduced existence. By then I found I thought of Klaus less and less. My life had become full of more interesting things. New projects, new challenges, new relationships with people who valued honesty and integrity. I had even started dating again, a civil engineer named Friedrich, whom I met at a conference in Munich, a widower who appreciated both my professional achievements and my personal journey. Now, at 65, I can look back on the last 20 years with satisfaction rather than bitterness. I turned Klaus's betrayal into the foundation of a better life, not just for me, but for the many people whose lives I've been able to touch through my success. Petra is now a department head at her school and considering a master's program. Her son Lucas, now 24, graduated from the Technical University and works as a structural engineer, inspired, he tells me. By those afternoons, he spent as a child in our office asking questions about bridges and buildings. Müller-Schmidt-Bau continues to thrive, now under the capable leadership of Heinrich's daughter Anna, who joined 5 years ago with fresh ideas about sustainable construction and green technologies. I remain chair of the board, but spend most of my time on philanthropic projects and mentoring other women entrepreneurs. The bridge over the Neckar still stands as a testament to what can rise when someone refuses to be beaten by betrayal. Every morning, when I drink my coffee on the terrace of my house overlooking the Rhine Valley, I can see it in the distance, linking two sides of a city that might otherwise remain apart. If my story touched your heart, if you found inspiration in this journey from betrayal to triumph, I'd be very grateful if you subscribe to my channel and shared this video with others who might need to hear it. These old hands have built more than contracts and concrete. They've built a life I chose, stone by careful stone, after the rubble. If you're standing in the ashes of a marriage, a business, a friendship, then listen to an old Swabian. Secure your evidence, steady your breath, and make a plan. You don't win by shouting at the fire. You win by learning where to place the next stone. If you take anything from my story, let it be this. First, protect yourself with facts. Feelings matter, but documents win. Second, protect your name. Reputation in Germany travels faster than the ice from Stuttgart to Mannheim, so steer it yourself. Third, turn your anger into architecture. Build something useful out of the energy betrayal leaves behind. Your business, your craft, your education, your community. And remember, compassion isn't weakness. It proves you are free. Helping Petra didn't erase what Klaus did. It erased his power over the ending. Justice closed the door. Mercy opened a window. So here I stand, at 65, morning sun over the Rhine, coffee warm in my palm, and a city stitched together by a bridge I helped bring into the world. When the light hits the steel just right, it looks like a signature written across the water. My signature, not his. If you've been hurt, I won't tell you, move on. I'll tell you, move forward. There's a difference. Moving on forgets. Moving forward remembers wisely and chooses better. Write me in the comments what you're building now. Your degree, your small shop, your second chance. I read every single one. And if this story gave you strength, tap subscribe so more people who need it can find it. From my terrace to your kitchen table, from Stuttgart to wherever you are, you're not at the end yet. I wasn't. And look what these old hands have built.